Welcome back to Night Five Channel. I'm JJ Booksmart, and today we are talking everything Sunrise on the Reaping. This is a in-depth spoiler review. I will not lie, because it is an in-depth spoiler review. We're breaking this into 3 different sections. So we have part 1, part 2, and part 3, and then like a little wrap-up. I am talking all about it in like all my great details with my sister, because we have a book club going on right now. That being said, I figured I'd also do like an in-depth video for you guys, but I will put a non-spoiler review right now. Hello, let's come in here and do a non-spoiler review for Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. This is a story that follows Haymitch Aberanthy as he is put into the Quarter Quell in the world of the Hunger Games. This is technically prequel number 2, so I would count Sonbergs and Snakes at point 1. This is point 5, and then we have Hunger Games, which is book 1. Or if you want to go with that being book 1, this is book 2, Hunger Games book 3. It does lead directly into the Hunger Games, which is really, really great. I'd also like to mention that there are spoilers for Mockingjay at the end of this book, so if you're someone who's never read the Hunger Games or never seen the Hunger Games, do not read the epilogue until you read the sequels, and then come back and read the epilogue. You'll be very pleasantly surprised. Haymitch is a big character in that series, and so we were all really looking forward to his game. Quarter Quell in this one makes it particular because there's 48 people that go in, which is very fun. There's a lot of contestants, a lot of death. A lot. The writing is very much stronger, the pacing is much better. Overall, it's just a much better book than Sonbergs and Snakes in my opinion. I would highly recommend it. We are about to jump into some massive spoilers. I really deep dive into this novel, so if you don't want to know anything, I would recommend go read it, go have a good time, cry a little, come back, and we can talk all about it. Alright, jump into the video. I'm glad Jacob explained it to you. This is prequel number 2, so if you're reading in timeline order, it goes Battle of Sonbergs and Snakes, Sunrise on the Reaping, and then it goes Hunger Games by Catching Fire in Mockingjay. I will have to mention, and I'm just going to be honest with you, this is spoilers for the entire series. I'm not cookie cuttering to this book. This is all about the lore. It's all about deep diving into Haymitch and all these things, as we all know. And I have detailed notes for every chapter, and so I'm going to go through all my notes for every chapter, and if there's anything else I missed or it reminds me of, I will also mention it there. That's how these reviews will be done. Once again, it just makes the most sense in my brain to do it this way. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to cover part 1, which is called The Birthday. This is the algorithm for The Birthday is very simple. It's Haymitch's birthday. He was born on Reaping Day, which is really interesting because some are mentioned again throughout the rest of the books, but he does get drunk more on Reaping Day than any other day. And so that is a theory of mine. That being said, I do have some thoughts and opinions, and it does require you to have knowledge of Battle of Sonbergs and Snakes. Even if you just have the basic knowledge of the movie, you don't have the full knowledge of the book, as I hate the book with a strong passion. So like I'm a little mixed on that. I think the movie was much better. That being said, let's talk about chapter 1. Once again, I have a summary gloss notes. We're going to talk about those. The different things that stuck out to me is Haymitch loves a covey. Coveys in general got introduced in Battle of Sonbergs and Snakes are directly reference to the hanging tree, which is the only really light that they have in the Hunger Games, is that one song in 12. This is where Lucy Gray comes from, and the menorah is also a covey, and he's in love with her. Which is really interesting, and the big theory that me and my sister have is that she's obviously going to die by the end. She's also born later on based on alcohol, and I wonder if I have a theory about that as well, so we'll jump into that. The logo, this logo is what he takes into the games. It is given to him just like it is the Katniss handed to him as a present in the books. In the movie, she finds it at a shop, but in the book, she's handed by the mayor's daughter. So that's what I mean there. Then we also have our first Everdeen reference in this book, and that is Burdock. And we are trying to figure out the relationship between Burdock, because we do know that Katniss is born in like 16 years. He's related to them somehow because Everdeen's, we're thinking uncle. And then another big shocker is that, like, this is the Reaping Day, he doesn't get picked for the Quarter Quell, and then another person who does get picked ends up running away and getting shot in death. We also learn that Drusilla, which is I guess Effie is in this book because she's being casted. I didn't know that. Effie's character is ruthless, really, really ruthless throughout this entire story. Took me by storm. She even threatens. But because Lenora ends up getting involved in this early attack, he sacrifices himself. He also has a younger brother, and me and my sister went back and forth if they should include siblings because they're never talked about again either. So I do have a strong believing that he does end up winning, and we're going to soon learn that's not the plan because he's doing things that President so doesn't want him to do, unshockingly. His whole entire family is going to die. Which, if you think about it this way, if the consequence of him winning the Hunger Games is the fact his entire family does get killed, is everybody that he loves Tubbs gets killed because of him winning the Hunger Games, and that being the greatest thing that President So can do to him, even throughout all the other horrible things that we know that Haymitch eventually will go through. That could explain his coldness and basically begging for them to die in the first book as well, or in the first, when Katniss goes in. Plutarch is also somebody here. He is the cameraman, and he's very similar. The character is very, very true to what Plutarch ends up becoming. And you can also even see some of the notices here with Plutarch into what his character and almost how Haymitch holds himself later on. Another thing took me by surprise is cigarettes. That was crazy to me. And then I also have this running theory is that Lenora would get put into the games with him. That does not end up happening. We'll talk about that as well. That was chapter 2. We're moving on to chapter 3. Once again, it's been a minute since I read this, so we are really just glossing over my notes here. We have mentions of District 13 because Lenora wants to run away. She believes there's colonies past the mountain, which we obviously do know is true. And we also have our only reference so far to Lucy Gray being the only District 12 winner of the Hunger Games, and she ends up disappearing and no one knows who she is. That was so long ago that they don't think she would be a mentor, but they are specifically not having a mentor. They do get a mentor. We'll talk about her later on. I forgot about the intention of beauty, but it also makes sense because you're trying to sell them. I have a note about it, but I don't really think it's necessary. So some other things. So by this point, he's getting to know the group, understanding the group. There's a group. There's 4 of them. We have another boy who's a bit more headstrong. We have a girl who's snotty, or who comes across as snotty. We have another one who is really sweet and you want to take care of. Things reminds me a lot of Rooted in the first Hunger Games. Another thing that also was shocking, but also not shocking at the same time, is the gambling that goes on in the districts. People will put bets on if their kids are going to live, if their kids are not going to live, and because they're from District 12, most parents put on the fact that they're not going to live. I hope we win big. It's really, really sad, and that is like one of the things talking about, because the guy who's with them, his dad is a big gambler. I will have to say the group itself they didn't feel very distinct, which was an annoying factor. However, I make this note, and then Maisley ends up attacking Drusilla, like a pout of revenge, and then Drusilla ends up attacking her. And I found that to be a really, really good and dynamic scene, really showing everybody's character, which I really, really liked. Another thing is that, in Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, when they presented the district people to the capital, they were presented as objects in a zoo and treated very horribly. So one of the most things that stuck out to me, very clean as day. As in this book, we're seeing more of what the Hunger Games are going to turn into. They have a grooming section. They have showers. That whole entire section, I think, is probably going to get cut for the movies. I can't see them going forward with any of that just because of how graphic it was in the book. I mean, they can tone it down, but I don't know if there's a way. It reminded me a lot of the section inside Allegiant, the movie, not so much the books. Obviously, we know the Divergent takes a really tail-end spin off of source material. But we learn that, they have apartment townhouses that they stay in, but they do have a place that they're going to go when they're going to train with every victor, and they're going to get ranked for sponsors. We do know that several implements that Cornelius and his group of kids did bring the Hunger Games back, made it more televised, made it better to win, and also that sponsors are becoming more popular thing. These are all things that we do learn, and we learn that it's turning more into what we know the Hunger Games will eventually become, which I find to be the most interesting because I always love little tidbits of like this. And so all these things I enjoyed. Names are out of control in my opinion in this one, but they were also out of control in every other Hunger Games. I think Colin likes weird names. Also, one thing I did not expect was that Luella dies. So they have to go through the whole thing, they get groomed, and then they're going to go on the chariot. Okay, the chariot was not in the original in Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Obviously, it's iconic in the Hunger Games. And they go through the chariot, and I'm wondering if Susan Collins was like, okay, this is one of the top scenes that most people think of is the chariot sequences because of the dresses and because of what they did. Because of, she did it really iconically, I guess. And the movies just brought it to life even more iconic. This big one is that there's a huge crash and Lula ends up dying, and he ends up taking the dead body to President Snow's doorsteps, and as a fuck you, and I think it was perfect, and I was a big fan. I don't know if he ends up taking the doorsteps in chapter 5, or if it's a chapter 6 thing. I do believe it's a chapter 6 thing, because my theory was, because he ends up being put into the games this way, I was like, oh my god, they're going to bring Lenora in the same way, which I felt like was really, what is the right word here, really cheap. I feel like if you're writing a book, you need to be a little bit more original than that, using the same action, same trope twice. We're gonna find out is not the case. We also get to learn every victor's name, of which, interestingly enough, here a lot of the names do sound the same in the category. There are 48 of them, so I don't judge her for that too much, but it is confusing when reading and you're interacting with all these people. The only ones that really stick out are the ones that stick out because maybe that's the purpose? I don't know. However, as you guys can see here in District 12, it does say Luella is going to be continuing on with the games, which I found to be quite interesting. Another thing that we end up finding out here is that Mags is in this book, hopefully played by the beautiful person from that was nominated for an Oscar last year. That would be amazing casting. But we also find out that Mags is not their mentor. I thought Mags won the same game that Finnick won, but I have since learned that is not the case. Finnick wins the game a little bit in the future of this, like 3 or 4 years later, maybe 5 years later. She's his mentor. So he's the one who helped him survive everything past the games and getting prepared for the games. But Wyrus, which is the person who ends up becoming their mentor, wins in such a fascinating game where it's all mirrors and she wins by hiding in plain sight. It was a beautiful way of explaining it. I just had such a good time. Other things to take part of as we move forward, I don't have a lot of notes for certain chapters, is that the pace for this one is very brisk, which I love. I felt like Ballads, Strawberries, and Snakes was such a snaz. And then we also have Haymitch. One of the things in here is rebellion. Again, is a key part here, which is so interesting with Haymitch's character going forward. He wants to be a part of this rebellion. He's asking for ways to be a part of this rebellion. And then also the fact that he's really, really good at throwing knives, which is not something I would have put Haymitch for, but he's also a drunk later on in life, so you know what I mean? Ampart is one of those characters I do feel like's death when he does end up dying in the quarter quell, unless it's really quick. Very early on, could be very affecting, as I find the character to be so kind and so sweet. And the fact that this is never explained in BD's past in the future is also really frustrating to me. He's only in these games because of BD as a response, which I find to be just super depressing. BD is his mentor, he is his father, and he knew this going in, that he was going to be put into these games. And then we also have the potato, which is worn by BD. But I had to wonder if this is just a conversation for future reference for Catching Fire when she takes down the force field. As that is something that he explains here, is that is something that can happen, is that the force field can come down if you hit it with enough lightning, which is obviously we do know ends up happening with Katniss. But there's like this whole sequence that's dedicated to this potato, which is basically explaining what I'm explaining to you. They form a huge alliance, which is also something very different. To remember that this section of the games are not televised, they are different from the next section, or from the Hunger Games, and so it's a lot more intimate, it seems like. And so they all band together to take out the careers, the top 3 districts, and then go after one another each other afterwards, which I also find really interesting, and they all agree. Like, literally, they're all in a big alliance. Now, at the end of this chapter, we are told that he has requested, President Snow has requested a visit with Haymitch himself, and so BD ends up taking him back to his house, and we learn, or no, Plutarch ends up taking him back to his house. We learn a lot of information. We learn that she is named after an alcohol, which I think could be a way for him, if he drinks the same alcohol, relate back to the love of his life. And so in a way, he is a drunk, but also in a way it's a celebration, which I think has a lot of layers if that ends up being the case. The bitch returns, that's what I like to call him. Stupid petty bitch in my opinion. You can fight me on it, I don't care. I think Tom Blythe did an amazing job. Still makes him a petty bitch. But that being said, he is already poisoned by this point. And my theory is that he's already taking the poison so he can kill off the people he doesn't like, which I think is a great theory. And I think it's also proven like later on in life. But also we learn, because he is in love with the Covey girl, and and President Snow knows that he's in love with the Covey girl, that he is still being a petty bitch, and he's still doing all these things because he's mad at the fact that Lucy Gray is still holding a tracker, still holding a thing on District 12, and the messed upness that it affected President Snow was crazy. The fact that it ruined so many lives because of it is absolutely crazy. And then we also learn at the very end that Luella is alive, and my theory here is, which after talking to my sister I really do think is true, I think she's just a basic clone. They make mutts, they make all these things that are supposed to resemble the person that have been murdered, why not go ahead and just send in somebody? Then you have a personal person that can report back to President Snow at any point in time throughout the game to make sure Haymitch is following orders, or he can go through and start killing off his family while being in the game, which makes it even more intense for Haymitch, makes the game even more intense for us to read, because he makes one wrong move, you have someone who can call back to it. And I'm assuming if you have one clone of Lua, you have multiple, so she dies, she can get sent back in as long as she doesn't die on camera. Also, no one saw her die. No one saw that experience. It was all not televised because once the crash happens, they cut off the cameras. And so no one knows except for the victors around them. And so I do wonder what the reaction to the victors themselves are. I'm assuming they're just going to explain that she had a really bad injury and that she can come back. But I have no doubt in my mind that she is no longer herself. That is part 1. I'll be back for part 2, Sunrise on the Reaping, and we'll talk all theories and stuff as well. Let me come in here and update you. It has been a minute. The first update was back in April. Now it is end of July, and I'm officially continuing Sunrise on the Reaper. I see my sister this weekend. We're gonna do an in-depth discussion together. I'm very excited about it. That being said, I read part 2 last night, and I wanted to stop there so I can come in here and at least give you 3 parts. I don't, just to give you a heads up, this is definitely not going to be nearly as in-depth as part 1 was, but I think that's perfectly fine with me. I'm going to try to run through some stuff, though. We got some really interesting information. In this section of the book, we finish out the tour, or the finish out, like, making him who he is or whatever before the games. And then we also start the games, and then we also try to accomplish the goal. These are all the things that happen, so let's go through them together. The first big surprise is that Lulu, or Luella, or they end up calling her Lulu throughout the majority of the book. Luella is a character who, 1, ends up dying really quickly in the games, which I was really shocked by. 2, is just a random person from somewhere else. They don't know who or where they come from. There's a song that she ends up singing towards the beginning, like right before they go into the games, that makes people believe that she might be someone from 11 because of the song. Outside of that, we don't really have much information about this girl. He does some risky things in the games to try to save her, which is really interesting. We'll talk about the games, so it gets his own section. I'm just going to try to go through the plot points. So we have a lot of people trying to help him achieve this goal. We have Beanie, who's telling him that there is an electric current that goes underneath that you just have to find, and that's where the brain and the heart of the games is you take that out, you take out the games. He asks how, and he says all you gotta do is blow up a water tower, and we can flood it, and then it hopefully will be enough damage that the generator wouldn't turn back on, and so that sets out the plan. Okay, then we have Plutarch later on in the novel comes and tells him, hey, the sky is going to be the same as our sky, which means that you can follow the sun, you can follow the things to the areas that you're going, which points them in the right direction. We also learn that he is becoming a bit of a rascal, is what they end up calling him quite a bit, which I think is what part 2 is originally called, is the rascal. Yeah, which makes a lot of sense. He ends up becoming a bit of a rascal throughout this whole entire thing. He pisses off a lot of people. We have Mr. President Snow, who's pissed off on him. He ends up also pissing off a lot of people, like the game makers and stuff. He ends up getting a 1. I think it's the only 1 in the entire history of, or I'm sure there's others at this point, but at this point in the games, this was the first recorded 1. Essentially, he walked up to them and says, you're basically fucking killing us, what's wrong with you? And they didn't like it. What that did for him, what that did for his group that he was forming, this huge alliance, it made him stand out, very clearly stand out. And so he decided to play into mischievous, he decided to play into the bad guy role of it all. Not too harsh, the people can't be sympathetic towards you, but just the right amount. And I really enjoyed all those scenes where he was becoming the rascal. This continues on into the games because now he has a 1. He has this other goal that no one else has. He tells this big group that he's been building that he can no longer go with them and that they're going to be on their own in this competition, and he has to go on his own. He eventually meets Annabee as well. I don't know why my voice is squeaking. That's a first. There is a section, hold on, let me see if I can get through everything else. So right before the games start, right before they go on to have their conversations, Caesar, Fenugreek, before he goes on to the conversation with Caesar, we also get our first meeting of Effie Trinket before Effie Trinket becomes Effie Trinket. She is someone who is related to everybody in here. She comes in and she basically makes over them and does it beautifully. I'm so excited about that. That makes me very excited. You have no idea. I think it's I also feel like Effie's very true to Effie. which is amazing. And then Effie also has the moment before Haymitch gets brought up into the games where he comes and they have this little conversation, which I think is so important. I'm so happy that they put it in the game, or they put it in the book. That is such a good choice. When you start to think about some of this stuff on future ramification, it makes not a lot of sense, but I'm really happy it's here. So I'm not going to try to do that. Like the games itself, when we get into them, which we'll get into them in a minute, and they don't make a lot of sense in future. Like, why isn't a lot of this stuff referenced? And I'm assuming it's all written off, like what's her face is written off throughout this entire book. We got plenty of reference to Lucy Gray, but nothing directly. We also do know that the houses are still there in District. He does get a conversation from Lenora, from Plutarch, as a trust me type of thing, which I thought was nice, really interesting, and I'm still really curious. Obviously, Lenora ends up dying, and I just don't understand how. Now she got arrested. And so they could put her in this game somewhere. I don't really know. Also, they mentioned it several times at this point. Lulu's sink went missing right before the games. I don't know if that has anything either. It has not come into play except to distract her throughout the portion of the game that she was alive in. And there's a brief retrospective. This is on page 180. I'm going to read some lines to you from it. There's a brief retrospect right before they go out and they have the conversations with Caesar. So they talk about how the game started with the no frills version of the early years directly after the war, when the tributes were thrown into an old bombed out sports arena with weapons and little else. I watched carefully. He talks about the 10th games being a turning point, as that's the year that Lucy Gray won, but the only feature introduction of betting in the sponsors and the recruiting drones to drop things off. All mentioned multiple times throughout Sunbursts and Snakes. We also get a mention of how Mockingjays are born, which also comes from Sunbursts and Snakes. It's evolved from pure punishment to unapologetic entertainment. The original sports venues was abandoned as the game makers began to use existing settings in the wild or bombed out sounds, such as introducing an assortment of mutts and a variety of weapons. And so we're learning as these continue to go on, the game makers get a little bit more crazy and crazy. The 25th games, which was the first Quarter Quell, which is the one that took me by the most surprise, and now I think it's the book I want the most, almost in a way. And there's other characters that I'd love to read their story from. We talked about the Nick. I don't know if I could emotionally handle that, but I would like to try. The 25th is really interesting because the first Quarter Quell proved particularly heinous, as the districts were forced to choose their own tributes. How fascinating is that? Rather than relying on the reaping, another flicker named Lucky hosted with the commentary from a relic of a woman named Gao, who was credited with coming the phrase, "May the odds ever be in your favor," also showed up from this. Also fascinating. For the first Quell, the game makers had tributes kick off the capital portion by riding chariots to the streets. That's where that came from. They built an arena for a single use. Also, the cornucopia made its first appearance, loaded with weapon supplies, triggering a heated bloodbath the opening gong sounded. For the last 24 years, they unveiled a brand new arena each, based on different environments or themes, from a desert to a frigid landscape to Wires reflected puzzle, which they called the Nest of Mirrors. Wires is also another one that I'd be really intrigued to see her games as well. I'm wondering how young she was, because I wonder if Maya Hawk could still play her. I don't know how many years ago that was from this point. Second Quarter Quell Arena, and we'll talk. Okay, let's get into the arena, because the rest of the book is really, that's all I really wanted to read from that section. We learned really early on that the arena is pretty basic. It's pretty much the same as both the Hunger Games and, no, really just the Hunger Games is really what it's very similar to. They come out and there's a cornucopia, obviously, but it's a forest. It's a forest. He grabs a bag of food, he grabs a weapon, and he ends up taking off. We really learn really early on here that he is surrounded by fruits, he's surrounded by vegetables, clean water. We also learn very early on that everything is poisoned, which is really funny when you think about it because of Preston Snow. This comes into effect a little bit later, as well as Lulu ends up dying from a sort of poison, the same poison that President Snow supposedly has, practically confirmed in later on books, but at this point it's a supposed poison that he has for the flowers. That's how Lulu ends up dying. So after Lulu dies and they realize this, he can't save her, he gets attacked by these electric things. And they're like little dragonflies, but they're like shocking. And he ends up killing a bunch of them in a way that make it staged, like he's having a freak out moment so he can grab one to use it towards the electric current that he's been building, which is why we talked about it in the beginning of the book, which is why I mentioned the potato thing like 12 times. The potato thing, by the way, gets brought up like 2 more times, so like it's super important. Before he ends up beating Lulu, he realizes that his first victor from his hometown did die. That'd be Wyatt Calloway. Very sad, obviously. Now we're jumping forward ahead of time. He is now being met up by the names. I'm literally having a cast of names from the movie sitting in front of me to help me. Ampert, which is BT's son, ends up showing up and they end up working together. They end up finding the water tower. They end up blowing up the water tower. They're so excited by doing this thing that they didn't think they're going to be able to do. And then after they do this thing, this first section where we're stopping right now ends with it turns off for a minute and then it resets and he believes he has failed, and we'll see if that's the case. My thing here is, obviously if it was the start of a revolution during Haymitch's story, that obviously should be much more prevalent in the future books, but also it shows you that Catching Fire was born here. Haymitch could not be what they wanted him to be, and so Katniss ends up being what they want her to be, and she ends up figuring out a way to tear down the barrier, because they always thought they can't tear down the big screen and everything keeping them trapped inside, which later on we learn that's a lie. And this is the first attempt at that. And I would have to believe that they had others. Maybe not. Maybe they really did think this was a lose-lose situation. I'll be finishing it today, so I'll get back to you. Let's come in here and close out Sunrise on the Reaping. I did finish today by Susan Collins. I had immediate cold chills. I found the third act to be the best part of the book. So far it's the final act. It's extremely depressing. Unshockingly depressing. Mr. Snow really does a number on Haymitch. We're going to talk about the nuances that the ending of the book, in my opinion, brought to his drinking. And we also mentioned the epilogue at the end, which is a fast forward to present day. There's a lot of good little goodies in there, so we'll definitely talk about that as well. But let's start where the last part ended. Like I said, I couldn't really remember if he had known that it truly failed. But it truly did fail. There's a volcano that goes off, and he believes everybody is dead. A lot of people die. We do know that because of the cannons and stuff, and because there's only a few people left. We know that MT is also dead, and there's a lot of our characters that are also dead. But he also learns that the ash does burn your skin, but it's translucent, so it makes the whole thing really pretty. So the whole sequence in the movie is going to be gorgeous. I'm very excited about this. This also has amazing second book, Quarter Quell, Catching Fire stuff, which I also think is super, super good and super important. Sorry, I just want a list of the characters so I don't get them confused. He ends up running into Maylis. Maylis is covered in spots. She looks nothing like how she looked before. Trying to survive, really, honestly. And they end up working together. She ends up saving him from I think it's District 1? I don't know. I'm not sure. And then somebody comes in. I can't remember her name. It's a female character. I'm trying to look and see if any of these pop out. They don't. And they end up cutting off Maylis's head towards the third act, or towards the end of the games. And they end up getting into this fight, and they end up going through that same field. It's like a hedge maze, and then at the end of the hedge maze, they learn that it is the edge of the arena. And then if you throw something down, it will come back. It's like a force field. And so he decides to use it against the person, and the person does die. He ends up winning because she ends up getting hit in the head with the axe. Oh my god, it's not Maylis. So Maylis ends up dying in a different way. It's a young girl, but it's not Maylis. Maylis ends up dying in a different way. This little girl ends up getting her head chopped off. I was thinking maybe it was Perpusini? Welly is the name. I didn't recognize it when going through here. Well, I had maybe Welly is the one, and Proserpina, I think it's how you pronounce that, is the one who ends up killing her by chopping her head off, because she does try to react. And Proserpina gets the same axe lodged into her head. He makes a bomb, and he was going to blow himself up this way that no one wins, and it's an act of retaliation. And he actually does end up winning. They end up saving him, and we get a little bit of what happens during an original version of this. Of the Victor's tour. Takes place for 12 days. He's basically isolated and alone. The only person near him is Effie Trinket, and it made me cry, will not lie. Also, we learn here that they also see replays of past events that they think are going to traumatize him on the TV in the Capitol. And one of those things being the fact of Lucy is there, sings, and he puts together the fact that they were connected at that point, or believes that her and Cornelius were connected at that point, which I also just like fucking love. I was like, oh my god, finally, yes, let's talk about it. And I do love that Suzanne Collins is building this into the world and adding the more lore to it, because I think it does work quite a bit. He is put in a cage and poked and prodded for hours, fed like over and over again. It's really disgusting. And then they send him home back to 12, where they set a fire and kill his entire family, which was very hard to experience. And this is where he learns what they call sleeping tonics, which is alcohol, which we all know he eventually gets addicted to. And he takes these sleeping tonics quite a bit, and then he ends up finding Lenora. We do learn, I didn't talk about Lenora in the last section, but we do learn in the last section, that phone call that they had, that she was in prison, and then she said she was getting out. Well, she lied, and now she's officially coming out, and they end up meeting in the field where he believes that she would be, and she ends up dying from poison berries, which I find really interesting, planted there by Cornelius Snow. And then as time gradually progresses and stuff, we learn that he becomes a shell. Her only promise is that we don't ever find, like, the sunrise never comes to the reaping, which is why it's called Sunrise at the Reaping, which we obviously learn in the epilogue does get accomplished, but it takes a very long time. He ends up losing himself. Oh my god, I'm gonna cry again. I know it's really vague. I know it's not like as in depth as I would like, because there's like so many good things here. Towards the end here, he has a lot of like poems playing through his head, which I think is a great way to show the alcoholism taking place, and the fact that he's so drunk that this is what his brain is filled of. It's sort of these memories and harsh realities, and I just think it was like really, really well done. He ends up getting also met by Plutarch and Beatty, talking, actually I think just Plutarch talking about that they're still wanting to do a revolution, and he says, fuck you. Essentially, which is very true. But you can obviously see that the seeds are planted here for when Katniss does show up. The things he has to say about Katniss and Peeta, I do love. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the epilogue. I feel like a lot of people have talked about the epilogue in detail at this point in time. I don't know. I tried to really not to avoid spoilers. Lenora Dove comes to me now. She's not angry or dying. Oh, this is epilogue 381. So I think she's forgiven me. She's grown older with me, her face etched with fine lines and her hair touched with gray. Like she's been living her best life beside me as years pass, instead of lying in her grave. She's so rare and radiant. I fulfilled my promise about the reaping, or at least lent a hand. But she says I can't come to her yet. I have to look after my family. This is crazy. I first saw the girl at the hop when she was just a baby. Burdock was so proud of her. He trotted her around everywhere. After he died in that mine, oh my god, this is probably what it is. That's crazy. Okay, I don't want to think about it. Oh my god, because they're gonna like if it just be perfect if he came back, would he came back and did this? Because it does. I mean, technically, if they could, because, I mean, even like Jennifer Lawrence has said she wanted to come back and play this role again at a different time, and she's here. Okay. Tough and smart, her hair in two braids, and reminded me of all the world's Lila McCoy, my sweetheart of old. And after she volunteered for the games, that nickname couldn't help but slip out. I didn't want to let them in, her and Peeta, but the walls of the person's heart are not impregnable. Not if you have never known love. That's what Dove says anyway. Okay, this is also a really interesting one. I didn't want to have anything to do with her memorial book after the war. What use, what point to relive all the loss? But when Burdock's page came up, I had to mention him showing me the grave after I felt compelled to tell them about Maisie Donner, former owner of the Mockingjay pin, which is crazy, and I didn't even really put that together when she talked about how family, tributes, friends, and comrades and all, everybody, even my love. I finally told our story. After a few days after that, Katniss showed up with an old basket filled with goose eggs, not to eat, to hatch. I raided a few different nests so we can breed all night. Breed all right. Never mind that we had roast goose for dinner. She's not an easy person. She's like me, Pete always says, but she was smarter than me, or luckier. She's the one who finally kept the sun from rising. Pia fashioned some kind of incubator with the eggs. They, definitely need to get into the fact that they brought geese to life. I'm not sure I'll be here in the old therefore much longer. My liver's wrecked and I only dry out when the train's late. I drink differently these days, so less to forget, more of a habit. When my time comes, it comes, but I've had no idea when that will be. I know one thing though, the capital can never take Lenora Dove from me again. They never really did in the first place. Nothing you can take from me was ever worth keeping, and she's the most precious thing I've ever known. When I tell her that, she always says, I love you like all fire. Hello, let me come in here and close out this vlog, or close out this review. Essentially, when I filmed this review, I have most of it, but I cut out my ending. It is what it is. My phone died. Let's finish the Sunrise and Snakes, or Sunrise on the Reaping. I gave it 5 stars. I think that's all I really needed to say. And also, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I covered everything I wanted to cover from what I understand. I'm sure it cut off me talking about the epilogue a little bit, which is gorgeous and beautiful, but I love this book so much. I think it was a perfect comeback into this world, and there's parts where I'm like, oh, I'm happy that we had Slumbergs and Snakes, because parts of this like elevated that for it. But to be fair, the movie really elevated this book for me, as I hate that book, so I feel like the movie did a better job. That story. So, but anyway, that's that. Alright, thank you guys for watching.